faithfully delivering value, decoding great books from around the world. Oh, hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today I'll be breaking down a book titled Poetry Theory. Author Zhu Guangqian is a renowned modern aesthetician and literary theorist who particularly loves researching poetry. You believe that to cultivate a pure literary taste, you should start with poetry. If you can appreciate poems, you'll naturally enjoy novels, plays, and more. So, for Zhu Guangqian, poetry is the foundation of all literature and a key stepping stone into literary research. This book, Poetry Theory, was compiled from his lecture notes at Tsinghua and Wuhan universities. It's modern China's first comprehensive poetics work. By reading this, you'll learn how poetry evolved to what it is today and what its timeless essence is. Who knows? A light bulb moment might even spark your passion for writing poetry. All right, I'll cover this in 3 parts. First part, how poetry emerged. Second part, what's the true artistic nature of poetry? How does it differ from other art forms? Third part, the future path of modern Chinese poetry. Let's dive into part 1, the birth and development of poetry. So, first, poetry's origin. It's the earliest literary style, with examples like Homer's epics in the West and Chinese classics like the Book of Documents, I Ching, Laozi, and Zhuangzi blending poetic forms. But tracing poetry's history isn't about pinpointing the very first poem. Zhu Guangqian argued that to find poetry's roots, ask why humans sing and recite poems. Well, scholars from both East and West agree. Poetry is all about expressing feelings. Take the Mao Shishu preface in the Book of Songs. It says, poetry comes from the heart's aspirations. When voiced, it becomes verse. So, poetry expresses inner thoughts and feelings. Western thinkers say poetry captures mental states or reactions to nature. This view stems from Aristotle's Poetics in ancient Greece. Clearly, scholars agree poetry springs from human nature. It's as ancient as we are. So, what did the earliest form of poetry look like? Was it the kind of rhythm-heavy text we're all familiar with? Actually, no. In the earliest days, poetry appeared alongside music and dance, these 3 art forms together. Today, they seem vastly different. But in early humanity, this trinity formed the primal impulse to express inner feelings and mimic the surrounding world. Take Dionysian festivals in ancient Greece. Priests and worshippers sang and danced wildly, praising raw life force. This ecstatic performance birthed lyric poetry. The word lyric comes from Greek songs sung to the lyre. So clearly, this shared origin is fully described in the Book of Songs, preface 2. It says, emotions stir within, taking form in words. When words fail, we sigh. When sighs fail, we sing. When singing fails, hands dance and feet move unbidden. Meaning, when feelings arise, speak them, sigh them, sing them, and if that's not enough, dance them out. But later, this trinity gradually separated as civilization and rationality advanced. Overall, dance as a plastic art split first from more abstract forms like music and poetry, with poetry-music separation coming later. This separation marks 4 evolutionary stages of poetry. The first primitive stage, sound without meaning. Here, music dominated. Most songs lacked lyrics or had meaningless sounds like ah or ya, just for rhythm, as in primitive folk songs or modern nursery rhymes. As civilization progressed, lyrics gained meaning, connecting to people or objects. Poetry then entered its second stage, sound over meaning. Songs focused on melody, with lyrics secondary. Lyrics still conform to musical rhythms to exist, like folk songs in the Book of Songs, Song Dynasty lyrics, or epics. They mainly accompanied music. Without it, they were deemed unnecessary then. Oh, why do you say that? Well, because when Confucius compiled the Book of Songs, the lyrics were still there. But in Confucianism's view, true poetry vanished with the decline of the Zhou emperor's status. So this disappearance was really the music dying out, not the lyrics themselves. Thus, poetry entered the third stage, where sound and meaning separated, and lyrics became independent poetry. For instance, Confucius started valuing the ethical teaching role of lyrics that used to be secondary. Confucius believed that learning poetry could make people uphold roles like father son and ruler minister, expand knowledge of nature, giving lyrics, always music's appendage, their own value. As for poetry becoming a full fledged independent literary genre, that didn't happen until the Han Dynasty. Because in the Han Music Bureau, musicians only composed music without lyrics, and literati only wrote lyrics without composing. Music and lyrics became two distinct things. In the book, Zhu Guangqian cites Sima Shangru, a renowned scholar under Emperor Wu of Han, favored for his literary talent. Oh, historical records state that the emperor commanded Sima Shangru to create poetry and rhapsodies, and then by musicians. Li Yannian composed melodies to fit Sima Shangru's text, marking poetry's formal shift to the third stage of sound means split. Poetry authors weren't just ordinary folks humming tunes anymore. They became scholars adept at literary composition. But at this point, poetry's evolution wasn't complete. After splitting from music, it began focusing on word rhythm to keep a musical feel when recited. So, poetry's progress entered its last phase, the fourth stage where sound and meaning reunite. This is evident in new poetry creation patterns from the Han to Sui Tang eras. A trend developed. Earlier, we talked about the Han Music Bureau. It was a royal music agency tasked with producing music paired with poetry, known as Yufu poetry, examples being Marching Out the East Gate and Watering Horses at the Great Wall Cave. Originally, these poems were different lyric versions set to the same musical framework. However, starting from the Northern and Southern dynasties, poetry's independent tendency sharpened, and scholars began exploring word sounds, inventing tonal meters and rhymes. So, what exactly are tonal meters? They're the patterns of rhythm and cadence, like the relationships in level, level, oblique, oblique, level. This relies on Chinese characters' tonal variations. When composing, meaning matters, but total rules matter even more. Thus emerged parallel phrasing, like cloud paired with rain, snow with wind, sunset glow with clear sky, all while following rhyme rules. This poetry is called regulated verse, first emerging in the Six Dynasties and flourishing in the Tang Dynasty. The masterpieces by Tang poets we know, from quatrains to regulated verse, all follow this. Their musicality comes from poetry's own rules, not royal musicians' tunes, marking poetry's full maturity. All right, that covers part one. Poetry springs from humanity's deepest emotions. Its separation from music granted independence, making it an art balancing meaning with linguistic rhythm. Having covered poetry's origins, let's explore part two, poetry's true artistic essence. As mentioned, poetry arises from human nature, our need to express feelings. But this expression doesn't mechanically copy life. It lifts you from reality, transforming our finite existence into something infinitely rich and beautiful. To Zhu Guangqian, poetry is a world ruled by the poet's inner self, an alternate reality they create. This poetic realm is poetry's artistic essence. To achieve this realm, poets infuse their insights and sensibilities into observations. Take Dufu's lines, feeling the times flowers shed tears, hating separation, birds startle the heart. Written during the Anshi Rebellion. The one interpretation. In that chaos, even spring flowers grieved for the turmoil, and spring birds cried anxiously amid separation. Separated from family during war, utterly alone, Dufu needed the world to understand his sorrow. Seeing flowers and hearing birds, he believed heaven and earth shared his grief. Thus emerges the poem's artistic conception. But through Dufu, we see poets reshape reality with their inner world, making ordinary things echo their feelings, thus sparking universal empathy. This is the poetic realm. Zhu Guangqian's view on poetry's realm is called the poetic realm theory. This theory involves two concepts, emotional resonance and imagery. Emotional resonance means the personal feelings and subjectivity behind creation. Like Dufu's grief in Spring View, that's emotional resonance, while flowers and birds reflecting his sorrow are imagery. Oh, for the poetic realm to resonate instantly, emotional resonance and imagery must fuse perfectly. No sense of detachment. Zhu Guangqian believed Tao Yuanming mastered this fusion best. Tao transformed daily life into art. Like his famous line, picking chrysanthemums by the east fence, I see South Mountains serenely, using nature to express tranquil self-forgetfulness. Or I grasp the zither's essence. Why need actual strings, where Tao performed on a stringless instrument? The stringless zither symbolizes his mind unbounded by rules. This transcendent emotion achieves silence speaking louder than sound. Of course, turning emotion and imagery into poetry requires a burst of concentrated thought, created in one breath. Zhu's theory stresses poets don't first feel emotion, then translate it into words. When poetic impulse arises, it flows as thought in the mind, emotion in breath, words on the tongue, and writing through the hand. The knuckles manifest emotion. This is poetry's essential creative trait. So that covers poetry's artistic essence. As an art form, its essence is creating a realm where poets reshape reality through subjective feelings, making it resonate emotionally to stir readers. Poetic creation happens in one concentrated burst of thought and feeling. To highlight poetry's uniqueness, Zhu contrasts it with prose, music, and painting. First, let's compare poetry and prose. Zhu Guangqian believed poetry is pure literature with rhythm, while prose doesn't necessarily follow rhythm and prioritizes practicality over literary value. Poetry expresses emotional resonance and sentiment. Prose focuses more on conveying factual content. In essence, poetry requires reflection after reading, whereas prose says what it needs to say directly. Poetry uses passionate exclamatory tones. Prose uses calm, narrative tones. Poetry lingers emotionally. Prose reasons logically. Now, let's examine poetry and music's similarities and differences. As mentioned, poetry and music share origins. Both must align with audience expectations, flowing with our physical and emotional rhythms to create wonder. So where do they differ? Zhu argued music has pure rhythm without linguistic meaning, while poetry's sounds carry semantic content. Thus, music is pure form. Poetry combines form and content. Finally, Zhu contrasted poetry with painting. We often say there's painting in poetry and poetry in painting. But truly, only masters like Wan Wei or Su Danpo achieved this. Zhu saw clear distinctions between these art forms. Poetry suits motion description. Painting excels with still objects. Poetry creates animation. Painters capture single frames. Modern painters labored to depict Tang poet Jia Dao's Walking Alone, the line walking alone by deep pool shadows under trees. Despite dozens of attempts, they couldn't convey all its poetic essence. Similarly, painters struggle to describe their works poetically. Take Xu Wei, a Ming painting master. His inscriptions rarely matched his visual brilliance, showing how different these arts are. With prose, music, and painting compared, you now better appreciate poetry's uniqueness. Having covered poetry's history and artistic essence, finally, let's explore Zhu Guangqian's vision for Chinese poetry's future. So, when poetry theory was written, it coincided with the vernacular movement, where society widely promoted creating new poetry and abandoning old poetry. In Zhu Guangqian's view, the newly emerging new poetry creation wasn't satisfying, except for a few new poets like Dai Wangshu, Fei Ming, Feng Ji, etc. Most discarded old poetic forms without creating refined new ones or capturing traditional artistry's sophistication. Compared to that, new poetry's flaws and beauty are way too obvious. We all know ancient Chinese poetry emphasized form, tonal patterns like ping and zai, parallel phrasing, and rhyme schemes accumulated over millennia, making it super mature. Even if you translate old poetry into vernacular, it loses its beauty. Like in the Book of Songs, there's a line, long ago when I set out, willows swayed gently, Now returning on the road, heavy snow flies all over the sky. One vernacular translation goes, recalling when I first marched out, willows swayed gently. Now returning on the road, heavy snow flies all over the sky. Although this is just a vernacular translation of an ancient poem, it reveals two glaring problems in modern Chinese poetry creation. First, modern Chinese poetry often expresses emotions too bluntly. Second, the beauty of poetic rhythm has vanished. And Western languages differ too much from Chinese, making their poetic forms hard to directly apply to Chinese vernacular poetry. New poetry's development has hit a roadblock. In light of this, Zhu Guangqian proposed 3 ways to achieve breakthroughs in new poetry creation. First, new poets should learn Western poetry thoroughly. Study how Western poets sense human affairs and use linguistic wit, digging deep into methods, not half understanding or cherry picking. He believed this is the most effective path to lead new poetry out of its predicament. However, this faces a huge cultural gap. If new poets want to master Western poetics, they must bridge language barriers and cultural divides, truly immerse in study, not just read a few translated works and think they've got it covered. Second, besides learning Western poetry, Zhu Guangqian also urged poets to revisit China's old poetry, which is quite intriguing. Amid society's wave pushing to abandon classical style poetry, only he had unique vision, encouraging new poets not to blindly discard tradition, but to mine its essence for inspiration. He particularly emphasized reviving the old poetry tradition that values rhythm and rhyme. Oh, he strongly opposed Hushi's new poetry movement slogan, writing poetry like talking. Zhu Guangqin believed poetry fundamentally differs from prose. As discussed earlier, one focuses on emotional expression, the other on factual narration. One captures life's emotional resonance, the language of writing. The other conveys narrative philosophy, the language of speaking. Therefore, new poets shouldn't turn poetry into line-broken prose. They must rediscover classical poetry's rhythmic beauty. Finally, Zhu Guangqian also advised new poets to learn from folk literature, because both Chinese and Western literary history show that literati literature declines when it becomes too highbrow, losing nourishment from folk roots. The more developed literatis' personal consciousness becomes, the more artistic sources dry up. Thus, to revitalize declining literati literature, one must return to basics and relearn from folk literature's soil. It can be said that even today, modern Chinese poetry still faces many challenges. Zhu Guangqian's advice remains highly valuable for understanding modern Chinese poetry's dilemmas and solving these thorny problems. All right, that concludes the 3 parts. Let's review the key points of poetry theory. First, Zhu Guangqian addressed poetry's origins. The question, he viewed poetry as springing from humanity's expressive nature, maturing through 4 evolutionary stages. Next, Zhu helped poetry answer, what am I? He proposed the poetic realm theory, analyzing poetry's artistic essence as rhythmic pure literature, where poets create alternate realities from subjective feelings, thus resonating with readers. Poetic creation is an uninterrupted process, a concentrated burst of thought and emotion. Finally, Zhu moved from theory to practice, contemplating poetry's modern fate, hoping new poetry could restore this literary crown jewel's brilliance. All right, that concludes our interpretation of poetry theory. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.